Hi, everyone. It's Steve Pikiell from NJ Advanced Media. This week's Rutgers Rant is brought to you by the New Brunswick Development Corporation. A big thank you to our sponsor and to all of our listeners for the continued support. Now let's get to the show.
From NJ.com and the Star Ledger, welcome to the Rutgers Rant, your one-stop podcast for the Scarlet Knights. With your host, Steve Pikiell, and Rutgers insiders Keith Sargent and James Cratch. Let's start shopping.
All right, hello everybody, Steve Pikiell here. Welcome back to the Rutgers Rant, joined by James Cratch, and this week by Brian Fonseca, which gives you a hint as to what we'll be talking about in the podcast. And let me set the scene for you, Fonseca, since you weren't at the Rutgers football game with Cratch and I on Saturday, but Rutgers loses to Maryland. And we're in the press box, and you know the walk from the press box down. You have to go down through the stands, across the field, up the other stands. It's a long walk to get from the press box to the press conference. And when we leave the press box, Rutgers is comfortably ahead of UMass. It was like, oh, okay, well, at least the basketball team is going to turn this around. By the time we get to the interview room, which is the Rutgers team room, it's a close game. So, you know, it takes Greg Schiano forever to get from into the press conference. So I pull up the ESPN Gamecast on my laptop, and I had asked Greg Schiano a question about the quarterbacks. And in the time that he gave a long answer about the quarterback situation, blending in a program, a great answer. But in the time that he was answering the question, Rutgers had blown the lead to UMass and had given up the three-pointer. And I can see it flash up on my Gamecast, the corner of my eye. I'm like, so, I wonder, like, because Greg Schiano's talking, if he could see my eyes sort of open wide during the course of this, because I caught a glimpse of what happened in UMass. And I guess that's the question, since we'll start there, because it's much more shocking, I think, than what happened with the football team. But, I mean, what happened? How did they lose that game?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question, right? I was kind of going through, I was watching the game and I was thinking the same thing. It was kind of like, I had a nice little story written about how Rutgers finally puts in a complete performance. The offense looks like it's functional for the first time in the year. They're defending decent enough. And then UMass is chipping away. And I'm thinking, all right, this is nice, but they're going to pull this out, right? And they just kept missing shots and committing fouls. And it just collapsed. I mean, UMass hit some tough shots. The last 2 threes they hit were like from the middle of nowhere, but you can't blow a 17-point second half lead to a team that you were dominating for the first 25 minutes. There's so many things that went wrong. They couldn't, the first 25 minutes, they scored 50 points in the paint or something absurd like that between Cliff and Ralph Agee. And then they didn't go into the paint for the rest of the game because UMass's zone somehow got infinitely better in the last 10 minutes or so. They reverted to bad shots, stopped moving the ball as much. They couldn't defend the perimeter. I mean, everything that went wrong in the first 5 games just kind of came back in the second half of that game. And the loss to Lafayette is obviously terrible for the reason of the fact that Lafayette is a sub 300 team on KenPom. I mean, that's terrible enough. But to lose the way you do at UMass is maybe even worse, just because of it felt like things were starting to go back on track, and it just collapsed, and it's embarrassing, right? It has to be.
Well, I guess you talking about that way, you can lose that game. Like, teams lose that game in non-conference play. It happens. You can even lose the Lafayette game. Syracuse lost to Colgate. It happens. You can lose the DePaul game. I mean, it's a bad Big East team, whatever, conference tournament, now bad Big East team. It happens, but you can't lose all 3. You can't lose them in a row, Cratch. I mean, this. Just taking this from the big picture perspective, we're not in December yet, and they're in danger of this season being over. I mean, that's kind of where it's at.
I mean, I think in the case of many fans, it is over. I think I was kind of fascinated going into this year of, could this team, and look, a lot of this is on Steve Pikiell. Steve Pikiell ran around to every microphone he could find telling the world this was his best team. And people kept saying, really? I mean, you were in the NCAA tournament, and then you lose Miles Johnson, and you lose Jacob Young. Best team. And he pushed the line. Best team. And now he's got this. So I think that's making the panic feel even greater. But no, you shouldn't lose any of those games. You can't lose all 3 of them in a row. And now you've got Clemson and Illinois. and this thing could completely spiral out of control. Like, the season could be over by Christmas. By the time, can they beat Central Connecticut State at 8:30 p.m. on Festivus? I don't know anymore.
Festivus for the rest of us. I guess that's it. And Fonseca, I mean, you better feel for this than I do. Can they turn? I mean, you now have to turn those 3 losses into wins you're not expecting. So you certainly, I don't know, Seton Hall seems like a must-win looming in a couple weeks. You got probably the 2 best teams in the Big Ten, or at least 2 of the 3 or 4 best teams in the Big Ten coming up here in Illinois and Purdue. And Clemson, they're not great, not as good as they were last year, but they're probably a tournament team. I mean, is there some hope? Give me a reason, if you're a Rutgers fan, to hope that they can win 3 out of the 4 games.
That's a very hard question. That's probably the hardest question you could ask. I mean, I have a very hard time finding any, shining light beam from the first 6 games. I mean, I guess they can't shoot any worse from 3. They're shooting 25%, which only 24%, which only 9 other teams in the country are shooting worse. So you'd think they would, regress to the mean there. That's one positive, I guess. But
or take 0 of them, one of the 2. Yeah.
Right. And you just figure that if they keep playing the way they have been playing, and I can't imagine they can get much better, because this is the reality of the team. As much as Steve Pikiell will double and triple and quadruple down on the fact that this is his best team yet. And I mean, to that point, I think Cratch is right. I think Pikiell really shot himself in the foot setting expectations that high, because you can tell people are very upset and they feel lied to, given how often he was pumping the team up and how they look. I mean, the reality cannot be more different than the expectations he set. So had he pumped the brakes and not been so forthcoming and wanted to pump up the players that he brought back and acknowledge that the losses he had were going to create as much as an impact as they did, maybe people would be ready for something like this. I think that adds – I mean, they would still be upset, obviously. I imagine it's not fun to lose 3 games in a row by 1 point or by 1 possession, but the expectations would be tempered. But unless they start making more threes, unless they play the way they did in the first half against UMass and not the second half, I think the season is pretty much over, because this team is not going to win, the 11 games in Big Ten play they have to win to go on the bubble, right? Like, I think the goalposts shift to an NIT as the goal, because, again, unless they have a drastic improvement, that's the ceiling for this team.
Right. The only 2 things I will say that does give you a little hope is, you're right, that the games did come down to the final possession, teams hitting big shots. Okay, if one ball bounces off the rim, it's a different story. And the Big Ten is not this powerhouse that it probably was last year. At least it seems to be a little bit down. I guess that gives you hope, Cratch. I mean, you buying or selling that? I mean, is there any? You have to assume that Ron Harper is going to be better than that. I don't know. I mean, kind of grasping at straws here, but it just seems hard to believe that we're talking about this in the past tense in November.
Yeah, I mean, look, certainly they could turn it around, I mean, if they win out in the non-conference, if they beat Clemson and beat Seton Hall, if they can get to 11 or 12 Big Ten wins, but again, it's hard to sit here and say, oh, they're going to go 12-8 in the Big Ten, because that's incredibly difficult to do. 10-10 feels like a real accomplishment in the Big Ten. Now the Big Ten is down, but yeah, I mean, I just think this is so fascinating, because I've been really kind of taken away how, like, Pikiell has no built-in equity, it seems. And maybe that's just, the loudest people are on Twitter and on the message boards. But even football, we've seen football, the crowd's thin and everything and the passion wane. But it took a long time to get to where it was by the time, Schiano came back. Basketball went from 0 to 100 like that under Pikiell, and you wonder if it could just easily go right back to 0, basically, almost. If this team continues at the pace they're at, I mean, this could be like 3,000 people in the rack for Big Ten play.
It is amazing. You're right. It is amazing about I thought that making the NCAA tournament would give Steve Pikiell 6 years of built up equity. It didn't get him 6 games based on people I talked to. And that definitely is an overreaction. And in college basketball, if they come out, they play well against Clemson, I think people go, okay, all right, well, we're back on track at least. And they'll be, but it is, you're right. It is amazing how
I think part of it too, I think part of it too is if you like Pat Hobbs has given Steve Pikiell everything.
Yeah.
A contract, the facility, his assistants. I think that's one thing I saw a sneak peek of like a question we had from an insider. I think there's a very good argument to be made that even after the pandemic year, last season, the Pat Hobbs should have gone to Steve Pikiell and said, Steve, you have to hire someone from the outside who can make this offense better. Yeah. I think it's a very, that probably should have been done because this offensive thing it's just never getting there. And, Brian can weigh in this, but this feels like the system he wants to run is just not getting to the point where it's all coming together.
You agree, Brian?
Yes. And I'll make this comparison to football in a very roundabout way. A lot of people are grilling Sean Gleason for the struggles of the offense. I think it's fair to say that many of the struggles are because they don't have the horses. I don't think that problem is to the same extent in basketball. And I agree with Cratch that the offensive system they run is very limited. It's very limited. But they also don't have the horses to make it reach its highest potential. They do get open looks. There are plenty of open looks in the games, and they're shooting 24%. I think any, halfway good basketball team can shoot better than 24% on threes. And so I think it's a combination of two. I agree with Cratch that they do need some form of a modern offense, if only to be more attractive of a destination for recruits. Because if I'm a high-level scorer, and that's what these top-level recruits are, they're high-level kids who can score, why would you want to come to play in a system that's just stale and really you can't stand out? I think that is as much part of it as
and it makes for an interesting transition or comparison. You mentioned football, and if you watch the game against Maryland and the game before it against Penn State, the offense is unwatchable. But there is the sense that, okay, we've got our quarterback, we've got our little Tua coming in next year, guy who's gonna make it interesting. They've recruited a quarterback. They've given you some hope. They brought him in early. You've got Gavin Wims that didn't play against Maryland. We're still not sure why. Likely not ready. He's still an 18-year-old kid. He's got to develop. But there is that feeling like, all right, football's got the guy. And it goes to expectations. Your point, Craig, about expectations. Greg Schiano inherited it at rock bottom, exceeded them in year one, and met, or even if you're realistic, met or even exceeded them in year two. Like 5 and 7, I think fans would have signed for 5 and 6 playing Maryland for a chance for a bowl game. If you're a realistic fan, you looked at that and you said, okay, well, I'd take that in year two. I mean, at least that the narrative for football is that the program's on schedule. And that's a good way to talk about this game. I mean, do you buy that as well? That when you look at what happened this season in football, at least it is heading in the right direction.
Certainly, I think they did exactly what they had to do this year. They went 5 and 7. Obviously, I think it would have helped to beat Maryland 2 years in a row, but they got a win over Indiana that I don't think anyone expected. They swept the non-conference. They beat Syracuse, which was, in hindsight, kept Syracuse out of a bowl game, in terms of local recruiting. The offense, it's kind of hard to say the offense regressed because all of their numbers, for the most part, were about the same. Now, granted, that was not all in Big Ten games in 2020. Obviously, they had some non-conference games to fatten things up in 2021. The offense was nowhere near as effective, I think, but I think it was basically the same thing. They did a lot of experimenting on the offensive line, as I wrote on Monday. That has to actually pay off in 2022. You played all these guys, you mixed and matched so much, and you need to get a couple players out of all that. But the biggest thing is, as you said, this is Gavin Wimsatt's program now. It looks like Noah Vedral is going to indeed stick around. Maybe he has a great summer and he pushes it and there's a little bit of platoon to start. I don't expect that. The Gleason era, it all kind of starts here. The problem is they're not going to be that much better next year than they were this year, I think.
Right. And that's the whole thing. Yeah. Looking forward. It's possible that this thing takes a step back in 2022, which we will address here in True or False. Another good transition, guys. Fonseca, I'm sure you remember the rules. Give you a topic, true or false, then we'll talk about them at the end. Let's start with this one. In the news today, true or false, Fran Brown, Rutgers' defensive backs coach and ace recruiter, will be the next head coach at Temple. Cratch, true or false?
False.
Wow. All right. Fonseca?
False.
I'm going to go true just for the sake of conversation later. Next one. True or false? Gavin Wimsatt will start the 2022 football opener at quarterback. Cratch, true or false?
True.
Fonseca?
These are layups. True.
I'm gonna go false too, just for conversation's sake, because Noah Vedral is coming back. All right, true or false? Rutgers will be bowl eligible in 2022. Cratch.
False.
Fonseca.
False.
Yeah, that's a big false for me as well. We'll look at the schedule next. All right, true or false? Get ready. It's going to be a busy transfer portal for Rutgers football this winter. Cratch, true or false?
I will say false.
All right, Fonseca?
That's a very relative term. I'll say true, but I'm interested to see what Cratch says.
Yeah, I want to hear Cratch too as well, because I think true. I thought true, but we'll see what he says. All right, true or false? Forget the postseason. This basketball team will finish below 500 overall. Cratch?
False. I think that this non-conference schedule, in hindsight, maybe was drawn to prevent that possibility, although losing to Lafayette probably wasn't in the plan.
Fonseca, true or false?
I think it's a very real possibility, but I will say false.
In fact, they were even asking the question. It's tough. I'll go false as well. All right, true or false? We keep on talking about the shooting woes, but the problem with the basketball team is defense. Cratch, true or false?
I'll say false.
All right, Fonseca?
I'll also say false, but I do think there is an interesting conversation to be had here.
All right, I'll go false as well. We'll have that conversation. A couple more. Football was bad. Men's hoops was worse. But the women's hoops loss on Saturday was the worst defeat of the day for Rutgers. Cratch, true or false?
False. I mean, football, bowl game, so much at stake.
Fonseca, true or false?
False. It's the third worst.
All right, I'm going to go true. It was 46-8 at halftime. How do you have that happen in a game? You're probably right. False. All right, and finally, true or false? Rutgers women's soccer will win the Natty. Cratch, true or false?
You're really going to make me look like a jerk. False.
I am going to make you look like a jerk in a minute, especially. Fonseca, true or false?
I'm breaking out the pom-poms, baby. They're going for the Natty.
Come on. You stole my thunder. I'm going to go true as well. Why not? They play Florida State against Florida State's the best team. All right, let's start there. Fonseca, you are a resident soccer expert, someone who watches European games and tweets about, I forget the team's name now, Benfica. Is Benfica? Is that what it is? Or
I'm so insulted.
Sporting.
I'm so insulted, Steve. Why would you say that?
Sorry. Porto? Which one? I know there's
It's Sporting. It's Sporting, yes. I hate Benfica with every fiber of my being.
Okay. Well, it was close. I almost give us your soccer break. Do you have any knowledge on this? They play Florida State. It looks like Florida State's the best team in the women's soccer, and then they would possibly play the defending champs in the next, if they get to the final game of this College Cup. What makes you optimistic?
I cannot say I've watched any Florida State women's soccer this year, so I can't give you any breakdown on the Seminoles. But
right.
I've watched a decent amount of Rutgers women's soccer. I think Megan McClellan, the Kearney native, shout out Soccer Town USA. She's been playing very well in the penalty shootouts and in regulation. Amira Ali's been getting a lot of chances, and I think at some point she will have a very efficient game and finish more of them than she misses. Frankie Tagliaferri has been great this season. There are a few very interesting, very talented freshmen on this team that have grown as the season went along and played really well against not TCU. I forget who they beat to get to against Arkansas. Yes, sorry, thank you. So yeah, I think there's a lot of reason to be optimistic, and I think Mike O'Neill has built this program to the point where Rutgers fans should be optimistic. I mean, they're back at the College Cup for the second time in 6 years. Why not?
Yeah. All right. Well, I'm buying. I'm all in. Push the chips to the table. All right. Jumping around here to the other topics we discussed. Kratz, give us why you don't think it's going to be a busy transfer portal. I mean, I think even it seemed like the exit door would be busy in some sense for kids who didn't play. What's your thought there?
Yeah, I was more looking at it from a bringing guys in. I mean, look, I think they're going to make some transfer portal additions, but I'm going to write about this later in the week. I think people who think that Rutgers is just going to transfer portal its way back to glory, like overnight, like Michigan State did, I don't think that's a realistic expectation. I think that, Mel Tucker was able to have so much success with the transfers in part because even though they hadn't recruited well in the last few years of Mark D'Antonio, he inherited a program that had a lot stronger foundation of talent to build on than Greg Schiano did. And it just comes back to its supply and demand. This is NFL free agency, and Rutgers needs an offensive lineman. They need a wide receiver. They need a tight end. They need a pass rusher. 129 other teams in America need that too. And, some of them are going to be ahead in the pecking order. So I think they're going to add transfers. I don't think it's going to be crazy, and I think that you need to be kind of temper your expectations about the impact those guys are going to have. So let's look. 2020 transfer portal class, very impactful. 4, Brendan White, helped them in year 1. They get Vedral, they get Cruikshank. Year 2, there were some injuries involved. This transfer portal group really didn't do much for them. Ifan Maija was a good defensive tackle who became a starter in the second half of the season. But they didn't get anything out of Youngblood. Christian Braswell didn't play this year. Ngugu didn't really do much before he was injured. So I think you need to be careful thinking that transfer portal is just going to magically make this team a 6-7-8 win team next year.
Right. I will say that it seemed like they have to get a guy, somebody who can play receiver and be a playmaker. I understand that those guys are hard to come by, but and you're right, Youngblood seemed like he would be that guy, and he wasn't that guy. So I don't know if there's an answer out there or not, but it'll be interesting to see what Greg Schiano does. All right, so we talked about bowl eligibility. We all said false there. I mean, the schedule is just – I look at it again this morning, at BC, give Temple the win, but the crossover games – as bad as Nebraska was this year, it's Nebraska. At Minnesota, again, I think we saw with beating Wisconsin that they're pretty good. Iowa is on the schedule, a home game. It's Iowa. It's just hard to pick up. It is hard to pick out 6 wins on that schedule. Even if I assume they're going to add one as a one AA or
yes, they will be adding a FCS scrimmage.
Right. Yes.
I would expect Norfolk State, or with pals, the good old days will be making an appearance at SHI Stadium sometime mid-September.
Right. I wonder how fans will feel about that if it is hard as it looks next year, and you're starting a freshman quarterback who's going to make mistakes and have growing pains. If they're going to be patient for it, I think that is a big question. What's going to happen in 2022? All right, what else do we want to talk about here? So we all said false on the basketball team finishing below 500, even though they're 3-3 with Seton Hall, Clemson in the non-conference. I mean, it's all you have to do is go 8-12 in the Big Ten, and you're right there, right? I mean, that's certainly possible. No,
it is. I mean, it's certainly possible. I just think at this point, with Gio there, with Ron there, you just have to hope that they kind of get hot at some point. Even if they have like a little 4-game win streak, that can kind of keep them above water.
Hey, Rutgers Rant listeners, it's Steve Pikiell from NJ Advance Media. We appreciate you supporting this podcast and the sponsors who help us continue doing it. This week's podcast is brought to you by the New Brunswick Development Corporation. If you listen to this show, you love Rutgers. And if you love Rutgers, you know the positive impact that DevCo has made on the campus and its community. We thank the New Brunswick Development Corporation for its continued support and for helping make this podcast possible. Now back to the show.
Who is going to be the head coach at Temple if not Fran Brown? And why would Temple not hire the best available Philadelphia recruiter or South Jersey recruiter?
I think it's a couple things. I mean, one, it's like different AD, different administration, but they had 2 chances to hire Fran the last time, and they didn't hire him either time when they hired Diaz and when they hired Rod Carey. I think salary becomes a concern. It looks like they're, $5 million to pay Carey and his assistants to go away, that's a lot of money at a school like Temple. I mean, that's basically 1 year's AAC TV payout. I think, I think Al Golden, there's a very good chance Al Golden comes back. I've heard that out there, that he's willing to come back. He's a guy who has obviously made a lot of money in his life, so maybe he can take a lower salary to start. I think with Fran, too, we've always tied Fran to Temple, but the Temple job has changed drastically since, he was up for it the last time and since he's come to Rutgers. AAC is a disaster. I mean, it's basically Temple and a bunch of schools from the South and the West. It's a lot harder to recruit now with Rutgers humming again. I don't know if it's the job that it used to be. I don't know if it might prove to no longer be the type of job where you can win games and springboard to the next job like it did for Golden and Rule and Jeff Collins and Adazio.
So what is Fran Brown's move then? What would be the next? This is an interesting question. What is the next job for a up and coming Rutgers assistant to take?
It might be a head coaching opportunity to somewhere else, at the FCS level, or, it could be there. I mean, it could be Temple. Look, if he gets offered the Temple head coaching job, he's going to take it. There's only 130 of these jobs in the country. Right. I just don't know if he's necessarily going to be the no doubt candidate that people think he would be. And look, if he gets a job, obviously it's a blow for Rutgers, but I don't think he's going to all these elite players that he's helped Rutgers recruit. I don't think he's necessarily going to be all of a sudden taking them all to Temple with him, because again, as we've said, Temple is in a league that no one really, the league, it's geographic outlier. It's not a Power 5 conference. And you've heard it from other former assistants from the first time Greg was here. They would have kids tell them, like, we love everything about you and your school, but we're not playing in that conference.
Right. Yeah. That's
and you might have the same thing there.
Very true. All right. Good job, guys. Let's dive into our Rutgers Insider questions. As always, thank you for subscribing. We had some therapy after the latest loss on there, texting back and forth, and as always, enjoy it. So thanks for your questions. We're going to start with JP, our man, JP, Marathon Man. JP is in London. Asking a question, which I could picture him walking through the Churchill War rooms with our podcast playing on in the background, or Westminster Abbey or something. It seems like that would be perfect sound for London. All right. It's a basketball question. Can the basketball season be saved? Is there a locker room issue? Do all the players in there need depth perception check? And is there a need for an offensive mastermind on the coaching staff? Now very apparent. Fonseca, Cratch mentioned this. One thing that obviously Steve Pikiell values having staff continuity. He's had assistant coaches stick around for a long time. Does he need to shake this up?
Yeah, I mean, at this point, it seems like the current tactics aren't working. Rutgers hasn't really had a functioning offense outside of maybe 2019-20. So if he wants to fix that, I think that's the route to go. The question is is that as much of a priority for him as A, the staff continuity, and B, the defensive side of the ball. We obviously know he's a defensive coach. We obviously know he puts most of his eggs in that basket. So is he willing to sacrifice what has really, I mean, it's worked, right? Outside of this awful start to the season, it helped him get Rutgers to the NCAA tournament, which I don't think people should take for granted how insane it is that in 5 years he took Rutgers to the NCAA tournament, right? So I don't know if he's willing to change his entire philosophy for the sake of fixing the offense. As for whether the season can be salvaged, I think a lot of things have to happen. I think all the senior leaders who have played poorly and have regressed this year have to play better. Geo Baker has to come back from his hamstring injury sooner rather than later and play a lot better. Ron Harper has been decent, but he has to push up his level. The younger players have to develop a lot quicker. Like Mawat Mag showed some signs. Jaden Jones has looked decent. So if they have to develop a lot quicker, Ralph Agee has to play the way he did against UMass, against everybody else, which might be tough considering UMass is one of the smallest teams in the country, and that contributed into him bullying them the way he did. So, I mean, is it possible? Yes. A lot of things have to go well, and the schedule really isn't getting any easier. Outside of games against Rider, Central Connecticut State, and Maine, Rutgers is playing teams within the top 110 for the rest of the year.
Wow.
Like the schedule is brutal. So unless they start playing a lot better than they have right now, I just don't see things turning around. And that's why I was very iffy on whether they can have a losing season, because it's possible given those circumstances.
Right. Okay. Another basketball question. You can take this one from Peter in Palm City, Cratch. Peter wants to know, is it possible Pikiell could be in trouble here? Looking at his sophomore class, he could have 3 busts, Mog, Palm, and Reber. Miller can't get a sniff, and 2 more unheralded guys next year. Ugh. I mean, I think I know we're going to go over this, but Pikiell is as much in trouble as a Supreme Court justice is at this point, I would think, with the current athletic director and his contract. Do you agree?
Yes. Steve Pikiell's not going anywhere. I mean, I think he's under contract until like 2025, 26 or something. And the big money doesn't come until the end. I mean, by the end of his current deal, he's going to be making just under what Greg Schiano makes. So, they are all in on that, Yeah, no, he's not in trouble, but I will say this. I think that the lack of equity has seemed to has surprised me, that people are so upset about this. And I do think that the way he recruits, Rutgers is going to have some down years here and there. It just seems like that's the trajectory of the program. The key is going to be, one, those, kind of in the middle years when you're rebuilding, you got to do something with them. So you've got to go to the NIT in those years. You have to maybe eke out an NCAA tournament bid. And then when you hit all the guys, when your guys are older, when they're juniors and seniors, you got to win. And I think that if it gets to the point where they don't have that rise again, or they don't make the tournament 2 years in a row, when they've got 2 tournament caliber teams back to back, that's when things start to get a little dicey. Because if the cycle gets busted and you start packing some bad or mediocre years on top of each other, people are going to get antsy. Look, I'm going to say this in the most intelligent, sober way I can. Rutgers has a state-of-the-art basketball facility. They're in the Big Ten. They can pay a head coach $3.5–4 million a year. If Steve Pikiell long-term doesn't go to the tournament consistently, there are going to be people here who think they can do better. It's just that it's going to be a different mentality, yeah. I think,
Yep.
And I also think the thing, too, is that people used to get afraid about Pikiell leaving. Look at the country. Look at the landscape. There's only 2 or 3 jobs out there that would want to hire Steve Pikiell, that Steve Pikiell would probably want to leave here for, between money and fit and everything. So, look, I think he's here for the long haul. But if this becomes a pattern that repeats for years and years and years, at some point, yeah, people are going to say, let's go take a run at a Hurley brother again.
Right. I agree. And I think you just can't write him off this quickly. Either he always said he was going to be a developmental program. He's going to bring guys in and find diamonds in the rough and develop them. He's done that. It's been a bad start. Could be a bad year, but he certainly has built in the equity to survive that. All right, really quick, then one more basketball question for you, Fonseca, from Paul Jaffe. If you could bring back either of the transfers who left the program, who would it be? Would it be Miles or Jacob Young? I know my answer is. I'm curious who yours is. Miles Johnson or Jacob Young. Which one would you want back?
I'm curious about yours too, because I think it is. I think it's a close call, really, because they have no depth at the 5 behind Cliff, and Cliff has been decent offensively, but sometimes on defense you just watch him and you wonder what's going on. What is he doing? Right? He's still learning on that job, and Miles did so much on that end of the floor to clean up any mistakes from everyone else. He protected the rim so well. He rebounded so well. And I think he did a lot of underappreciated things there. But I do think Jacob Young, in 2 separate categories. One, he's the only guy – he would be the only guy on this roster who can get any dribble penetration at all. Nobody else on this roster can attack a zone or dribble in and go to the rim and get a foul. They miss that desperately. And a lot of stuff comes from out of that. But I think, and again, this could be conjecture. This could be me projecting. I don't know how much of an impact this has because I'm not a college basketball player, and I see this from the outside. But he had a fire in his belly that I don't see on the floor. I haven't seen on the floor yet this season. It's contagious. It looked to be contagious last year, and I don't see that. I will say that I don't know how much of that is the fact that Rutgers does not have this monumental carrot that they're chasing. They've been chasing the NCAA carrot for years. They finally got it last year. Now is getting back there a second time as motivating? I don't know. And again, I'm not saying that I know that for a fact. I'm just thinking out loud here. But Jacob Young brings both the tangible and the intangible. So to answer the question, I think Jacob Young is the answer.
We agree on that. They'd be 5-1 if Jacob Young was here. They would have certainly beaten Lafayette. They would have handed them the ball in the second half, and he would have scored a bunch of points. I feel the same way of UMass, but it's a no-brainer. All right, let's go to football questions. Cratch, got a bunch of questions about where was Evan Simon, which is an interesting debate. I mean, we've been talking about the quarterback future. Noah Vedral benched at halftime against Maryland. Evan Simon came in, led him to 2 touchdown drives. Didn't look great otherwise, but is he playing himself into the conversation at quarterback?
I think they want him to play his way into staying. I think they would ideally look. They're not. I don't see how they're going to keep Snyder and Simon on this roster this offseason. I think they want to keep one of them definitely, because that way you have Wimsatt, you have Vedral, you have Simon potentially. You don't want to go into a situation because remember, didn't sign a quarterback in 2021, a scholarship quarterback. Don't have an offer to 2023 yet. You don't want to Gavin Rupp. I know they like what he works hard. He did good work on the scout team and practice, but you don't want him to be your third string quarterback, a preferred walk-on who's a redshirt freshman. So yeah, I mean, I think that I felt on the whole from everything we saw when I saw Snyder and Simon play, Snyder impressed me more. And Snyder was the first guy off the bench a great deal. But I will say this. They put Simon in at halftime and let him have the whole game, burning a red shirt, which surprised me. And then go back to Northwestern. When Vedral leaves the game, it was a 2-score game, with a good amount of time left on the clock. It was not a game where it was not garbage time. They went to Simon there. So, as I wrote, the way they managed the quarterbacks this year, all of them, made very little sense. Like, I really wasn't following Greg Schiano's explanation. Like, this game at halftime was the moment where he was like, this was a bridge too far. No more with Noah Vedral. We can't keep putting him out. It
was weird. Yeah.
It was very weird because it's like, well, I mean, kid got lit up so many times and played so poorly at times, and you never made a change. And then I thought Rutgers outthought itself with Wimsatt. Like, that was the moment right there.
Yes.
To put Wimsatt in and just let him go. Who cares? And they weren't able to do it because you had him take pointless snaps in Indiana in a blowout.
But they could have played. I don't think he still could have played. He was available.
They could have played. Yeah. I mean, I think the problem was they were trying to save him for this big bowl game. I also think that I'm starting to think they didn't want him to play at home, and for some reason.
Oh, well, that's crazy. That's the reason.
I mean,
that's just weird.
Look, they won't tell us what the plan is. They say they've got a plan. I'm going to take them at their word that they've got a plan. Don't think it was a very good plan in hindsight. But at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter because it's over now. The bridge season is complete. It's Gavin Wimsatt now. 2022, Chestnut Hill. That's the focus.
More football questions. We got John from Edison wants to know what coaching changes do you see happening with the football team? Are we looking at a shakeup? I think that's a really great question. And, obviously he kept his entire staff together from the COVID year to this year. I'd be very surprised, Cratch, if it's intact again. And that's not because there's going to be some kind of, it has to be a shakeup. It's just because of the nature of the beast. It's just very rare that you're able to do that. I mean, offensively, I would be stunned if Sean Gleason's not still the offensive coordinator. I think he believes in him, and I think he should believe in him. He had a bad year, a rough year for a lot of reasons, a lot of them out of his control. I think he'll be the offensive coordinator. I'm not as certain about Rob Smith. What do you think?
I don't. Here's my thing about Rob Smith. It's just like they have no pass rush. Some of that is scheme. Thought the secondary didn't play terribly well. Linebackers were okay, but this is, first off, I would say this. Greg Schiano is heavily involved in the defense. So the idea that the coordinators just do their own thing and Greg just sits there, that's not the way it is. 2, Greg has hired Rob Smith 3 times in his coaching career now. First time here at Rutgers with the Bucks, coming back to Rutgers. Clearly respects the guy. Good coach. I just don't know I don't think changing a defensive coordinator changes the fact that CJ Onyechi and Mike Tverdoff combined for 1 sack this year when they had 6 in 2020. It doesn't change the fact you played a lot of Keontae Hamilton, and he played well, but he's a young guy. It doesn't change the fact that Julius Turner's getting double and triple teams. Mohamed Touré is a guy who I still feel like they just don't get enough out of him for his ability. They had injuries. The secondary was some of this. I just don't think this is a situation where you just blame it all on the coordinator. And moreover, there are bad defenses in college football. I mean, giving up 600, 700 yards a game, giving up 56 points a week. Rutgers wasn't a good defense, but I never looked at this is a complete disaster defense.
Right. Won them 3 games. Won them the Syracuse game. Won them the.
That's what I'm saying. There are some bad defenses out there that literally they can't even get out of their stance. And Rutgers did give up a lot of big plays. That was a problem. So, yeah, I think, yes, naturally there's going to be some changes. But I don't think it's because, we must fire half these guys because we went 5-7. I think it's going to be natural advancement opportunities. I think there's going to be, progression. I think, jobs come up. Look, Syracuse is going to overhaul its staff. Temple's now open. UConn's open. UMass open. There's going to be a lot of jobs in the Northeast. I don't think there'll be as much turnover as maybe people think because without going, assistant by assistant, look at the roster. There are a lot of guys who have come back to Rutgers under Greg or are from New Jersey. Don't necessarily, as long as they still have a job, you would expect they're going to want to stay in that job.
Right. Yeah. So to answer that question, I totally agree with you. We're going to see, I'm going to put it at 3, give me the over under at 3, different assistants come and go. It's going to be a natural kind of deal. And it's not a bad thing either. I think at this point, for one, I think he could use another really high level recruiter. And 2, he probably uses just another set of eyes too, just someone else in the building who can, who can contribute to it. So we expect that to happen. All right, let me go through these, see what other questions we have here. Okay, so here's a question about you mentioned the defensive line in this one. I think this is a good one. We have optimism for an upgrade at quarterback on the roster. My question is whether we will have an upgrade at offensive line or an upgrade on defensive line next fall. Two of the key positions on the field. It seems like they're very optimistic about the young defensive linemen in the program. What do you think, Cratch, overall? Are we going to have improvement on those 2 positions for next year?
Defensive line, I think I'm less certain of just because I really think they've hopefully, they got to try to find someone, defensive end, pass rusher in the portal. But look, they like Wesley Bailey. I thought Aaron Lewis had a pretty good year. Keontae Hamilton's coming back. Majia's coming back by all accounts. They should be solid there. I just think the pass rush is the issue, but maybe you do different things schematically. Maybe you open things up a little bit. Maybe those guys are in the program. Offensive line is if Reggie Sutton's back and healthy and Raekwon O'Neal stays and Holland Pierce continues to develop, you've Rainey and Felter and Brown, you've got some options at guard. You like what Gus Zielinskis did at center. You get a guy out of the portal. You bring some recruits in. That unit should be better. But until we actually see Rutgers line up and have an offensive line that's Big Ten caliber, snap in and snap out, it's hard to forecast that. Because we thought the same thing a year ago, and then the group regressed.
Yep, very true. Good point. All right. Thanks, everyone, for your questions. There are a bunch we didn't answer. We might go back and try to send you a text with some answers later on today. All right. So we don't have any predictions in football to do. Do you want to do a quick hoops prediction? Here's what we'll do. A hoops prediction. We've got the next 4 games. Clemson on Tuesday, at Illinois, Purdue, Seton Hall. Fonseca, I'm throwing it to you. Give me their record in those 4 games, and which ones will they have a chance to win?
Before they put UMass, I said they have to go 3-2 in that 5-game stretch to kind of save the season. I'll stick to that. So they'd have to go 3-1 in these 4 games. I would put those odds at the plus 10,000 that it happens, right? I think their best chance is probably Clemson. Clemson looked good in the game I saw against St. Bonaventure, but they also blew a double-digit lead, so they're vulnerable. I don't think they'll beat Purdue. I think Purdue is going to just obliterate them because Purdue is insanely good.
Very good.
insane. Zach Edey is going to eat Cliff O'Maree's lunch. Not because Cliff O'Maree is particularly bad, but Zach Edey just looks unbelievable. Okay, to answer the question, I say they go 2-2. I think they beat Clemson and Illinois. And I think they get boat raced by Purdue, and Seton Hall boat races them at the Prudential Center.
Interesting.
I think they'll get close wins against Clemson and Illinois, and then they get double-digit losses to Purdue and Seton Hall.
All right. Well, I would assume that Clemson. I agree with you. That'd be the easiest win. But I like Seton Hall, but I would think that would, just because of the rivalry nature, that would be the next best possibility. I'm going to go 2-2 as well, with those two as W's and the 0-2 in Big Ten start. Kratch, you want to weigh in? What do you think?
I will also say 2-2. I think they beat Clemson on Tuesday night. I think they lose the two Big Ten games, and I think Seton Hall game. Look, Seton Hall should beat them. Seton Hall looks like the better team. I just feel like that's a game where that's on Gio and Ron. They got to take. They have to take the team and put it on their backs and get it done. And they have the bad blood, the business to take care of. They've got to take care of it.
And I will say this: if they lose to Clemson, that is going to be rough at the rack. So let's hope they're ready for that game. All right, what else we got? We talked about women's soccer. The Natty coming next week. Wrestling, a big win at the Prue Center, right?
8-0, off to a best start in years. North Carolina kind of sat some of their top guys. That takes a little bit of shine off the win, but still a good win for Rutgers. They're on the road. They're at American University on Friday night. They should roll in that, so be 9-0, potentially 10-0, because they'll be favored against Army at Jersey Mike's Arena on December 10th as well.
What is the best record dual meet history? Putting you in the spot here, what is the number of wins that they would have to? Do you have an idea? Ballpark?
Oh wow, not off the top of my head, no. There were probably some years when they were in the EIWA that they kind of racked some wins up. I will dig into the media guides and check that out. But obviously, it's a big start. But they've got 8 Big Ten dual meets, and Princeton and Rider on this waiting in the second semester. So, it's something that it's gonna be hard for them to really have a massively big winning streak, but they could be getting there.
All right, my final question, Fonseca. If you had a choice between having Sporting win, can't come up with what the thing would be. The Champions League, is that correct? Having Sporting win, I got it.
There you go.
Sporting win the Champions League, or having just a satchel full of $20 bills arrive, this dropped at your doorstep. Which one would you take?
It would have to be probably a $50 million satchel.
Really?
I think Sporting winning the Champions League would be the happiest moment of my life. Beyond anything that could happen, wife, kids, literally anything. I think that would be the peak of my life.
There's nothing the future Mrs. Fonseca can do to overcome that. That's great. I love it. All right. On that note, I will not mention Benfica again. Let's sign off here. We'll be back after, I guess, I don't know, maybe next week, maybe closer to the holidays. We'll see, to talk about where the basketball team is. And we haven't even talked about Rutgers recruiting. Geez. So we'll definitely be back to recap that when signing day comes and goes. Everyone, thanks for listening. Thanks for your questions. We'll see you soon.
Thank you for listening to the Rutgers Rant. To participate in the conversation and receive live updates about the Scarlet Knights directly to your phone, sign up at NJ.com/insider.
You haven't heard enough from me yet, huh? Steve Pikiell here for one last thank you to this episode's sponsor, New Brunswick Development Corporation, and to listeners like you who make it all the way to the end of the show. We'll see you again soon.